When my marriage crumbled after 8 years, I thought the worst part would be starting over at 32. I was wrong. The worst part was discovering that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had been waiting for this moment to tear me down. But they didn't count on my brother Marcus coming home from his 3rd deployment overseas. And they definitely didn't expect what he'd do when he found out how they'd been treating me. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The divorce papers felt heavier than they should have when I signed them that Tuesday morning in October. 8 years of marriage, reduced to a stack of legal documents and a division of assets that left me with almost nothing. David had played his cards perfectly. The house was in his name, the cars were his, and somehow his lawyer had convinced the court that my freelance graphic design work wasn't substantial enough to warrant significant alimony. I'd moved back into my childhood bedroom at my parents' house in Millbrook, a small town outside Albany where everyone knew everyone's business. The room still had my high school graduation photos on the wall and a twin bed that made my back ache every morning. At 32, I felt like a complete failure. The family dinner that first Friday back was when it all started. Mom had made her famous pot roast, and the whole clan had gathered around the dining room table like we used to when I was a kid. My parents, Robert and Linda Patterson, sat at opposite ends of the long oak table. My older sister Jessica was there with her husband Tom and their 2 perfect children. My younger sister Amy brought her fiancé Derek, who worked at the bank downtown and never let anyone forget it. "So Hannah," Jessica said, cutting into her meat with deliberate precision, "have you given any thought to what you're going to do now? I mean, you can't stay in that bedroom forever." I forced a smile. "I'm looking for my own place, just need to save up for a deposit." Amy snorted. "With what money? Didn't you tell us David got everything?" "Amy," Mom said half-heartedly, but she didn't really sound disapproving. "What? I'm just being realistic." Hannah made her bed, now she has to lie in it. Amy twirled her engagement ring around her finger. "Derek and I would never rush into marriage like that. We're taking our time, doing things right." 8 years isn't exactly rushing, I muttered. "Well, clearly it was if it didn't work out," Jessica chimed in. She'd always been the golden child. Married her college sweetheart right after graduation, had kids at the socially acceptable ages, lived in a picture-perfect suburban house with a white picket fence. Tom and I have been married for 12 years, and we've never even talked about divorce. Maybe you should have tried harder to make it work. Dad cleared his throat. "Your mother and I have been married for 35 years, through good times and bad. That's what marriage is. Commitment. You young people today, you give up too easily." The judgment in his voice stung worse than a slap. This was my father, the man who used to call me his little princess, who taught me how to ride a bike and helped me with my math homework. Now he was looking at me like I was a stranger who disappointed him. "You don't understand," I said quietly. "David changed. He became controlling, jealous. He wouldn't let me see my friends, and he criticized everything I did. He made me feel like I was going crazy." "Every marriage has problems," Mom said, refilling her wine glass. "You work through them. You don't just run away when things get difficult." I didn't run away. I tried for years to make it work. "Did you try couples counseling?" Tom asked. He was Jessica's husband, but somehow his opinion carried weight in this family. "Jennifer and I did that early in our marriage. Really helped us communicate better." David refused to go. "Well, maybe if you'd been a better wife, he wouldn't have refused," Amy said with a shrug that made my blood boil. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the table at these people who shared my DNA, who had raised me and claimed to love me, and I saw nothing but judgment and disappointment staring back at me. "I think I'll skip dessert," I said, standing up so quickly my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "Don't be so dramatic, Hannah," Jessica called after me as I headed for the stairs. That night, lying in my childhood bed, I could hear them talking downstairs. The walls in the old house were thin, and voices carried. "She's always been the dramatic one," Amy was saying. "Remember when she was in high school? All that poetry and black clothing phase? I just don't understand where we went wrong with her." Mom's voice drifted up. "Jessica and Amy both turned out fine. They have stable marriages, good careers. But Hannah, she was always different. Dad's voice was gravelly, tired, too sensitive, too stubborn. I told her David was a catch when she brought him home. Steady job, nice family. She should have counted her blessings. Well, now she's 32 and back in her childhood bedroom, Jessica said. No husband, no kids, no real career. What man is going to want her now? Quote, I pulled my pillow over my head, but I could still hear them. Maybe this will be a wake-up call, Tom added. Help her grow up and take responsibility for once. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. Every day brought new comments, new ways for my family to remind me of my failures. Mom would sigh dramatically when she did my laundry, muttering about how she thought she was done with this phase of motherhood. Dad would make pointed comments about people who don't pull their own weight. Jessica would call just to share updates about her perfect life, always ending with, but I'm sure things will turn around for you soon, Hannah. You just need to lower your expectations. Amy was the worst. She'd bring Derek over for dinner twice a week, and they'd sit there like an advertisement for successful young couples. Derek would talk about his promotion at the bank, their wedding plans, the house they were looking at in the nice part of town. Amy would nod along, shooting meaningful looks in my direction. Derek thinks we should have the wedding at the country club, she announced one evening, holding up her manicured nails to admire her ring. It's expensive, but you only get married once, right, Hannah? The implication was clear. I'd wasted my one shot at happiness. I started looking for apartments, but everything decent was beyond my budget. My freelance work was inconsistent, and without David's steady income, I was barely scraping by. Every rejection letter, we've decided to go with someone else, felt like another nail in the coffin of my independence. The worst part wasn't even the financial struggle. It was the constant feeling that I was being watched, judged, found wanting. Every phone call I made was overheard and analyzed. Every time I left the house, there were questions about where I was going and when I'd be back. Every meal was an opportunity for someone to make a comment about my choices, my attitude, my prospects. You know, Jessica said one afternoon when she'd stopped by with her kids, David called me last week. I looked up from my laptop where I'd been working on a logo design for a local bakery. What? He wanted to know how you were doing. He sounded genuinely concerned. She sat down on the couch, smoothing her skirt. He said he'd been thinking about you, wondering if maybe you two rushed into the divorce. My stomach dropped. What did you tell him? That you were struggling, obviously. That maybe some time apart would help you both see things more clearly. She smiled like she'd done me a favor. He's a good man, Hannah, and he's willing to forgive and forget if you are. Forgive me for what? I didn't do anything wrong. Everyone does things wrong in a marriage. The point is, he's offering you a second chance. Most women don't get that opportunity. That night, David started texting me. At first, they were casual messages asking how I was doing. Then they became more frequent, more personal. He missed me. He'd made mistakes too. Maybe we could meet for coffee and talk things through. I didn't respond, but somehow my silence became another mark against me in my family's eyes. David's been trying to reach out to you, Mom said over breakfast one morning. Amy told me he's been very respectful, very patient. How does Amy know about David's messages? Mom looked uncomfortable. Well, we all care about you, honey. We just want what's best for you. The realization hit me like a truck. They'd been talking to David, probably encouraging him, probably telling him exactly what Jessica had told me, that I was struggling, that I was weak, that I needed him. I felt trapped in a web of manipulation that extended far beyond the walls of my childhood home. My own family had become an extension of David's control, and they didn't even realize it. Or maybe they did realize it, and they just didn't care. That's when I started thinking about Marcus. Marcus had been deployed for 14 months, stationed somewhere in the Middle East that he couldn't talk about over video calls. My big brother, by 4 years, he'd joined the Marines straight out of high school and had been serving for over a decade. 3 tours overseas, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Bronze Star that he kept in a shoebox under his bed because he said medals were just pieces of metal. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. He was supposed to come home for Christmas, but his leave got pushed back twice. Then 3 times. I'd stopped expecting him when I got the text on a random Wednesday in November. Wheels down at Albany International tomorrow at 1,400 hours. Can you pick me up? I borrowed Mom's car and drove to the airport with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I hadn't seen Marcus in person for almost 2 years, and so much had changed since then. When he'd left for his last deployment, I was still married, still living in the house David and I had bought together, still believing I had my life figured out. The arrivals gate was crowded with families holding welcome home signs. I spotted him before he saw me. Even in civilian clothes, Marcus carried himself like a soldier. Broader shoulders than I remembered, a new scar running along his jawline, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. When he finally saw me, his face broke into the same crooked grin he'd had since we were kids. "There's my little sister," he said, wrapping me in a hug that lifted me off my feet. He smelled like airport coffee and something distinctly military, that combination of discipline and exhaustion that seemed to cling to him after every deployment. "God, I missed you," I said into his shoulder, and I meant it more than I'd realized. On the drive back to Millbrook, I tried to catch him up on everything without dwelling on the divorce, but Marcus had always been good at reading between the lines. "So you're staying at Mom and Dad's place now?" he asked, watching the familiar countryside roll past. "Just temporarily, until I find something I can afford." He nodded slowly. "And David's keeping the house. His name was on the deed. His lawyer was better." I tried to keep my voice neutral, but Marcus knew me too well. "What really happened, Hannah?" I glanced over at him. He was staring straight ahead, but I could see the tension in his jaw. Marcus had never liked David, though he'd kept his opinions to himself during the marriage. There had been a few moments over the years, family barbecues where David would make some cutting comment about my cooking or my appearance, and I'd catch Marcus watching with those sharp eyes of his. "It's complicated," I said. "Most things are. Doesn't mean you can't explain them." So I told him, not everything. Some wounds were still too fresh to expose to daylight, but enough. The isolation from friends, the constant criticism, the way David had slowly eroded my confidence until I barely recognized myself. The financial manipulation that left me with nothing. The family dinners where everyone acted like I was the villain in my own story. Marcus listened without interrupting, the way he always had. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Does anyone else know about this?" he finally asked. "What do you mean?" "The real reasons you left. The way he treated you." I shook my head. They don't want to hear it. Every time I try to explain, they act like I'm making excuses. Marcus's hands clenched into fists in his lap. "We'll see about that." That first dinner with Marcus home was different from all the ones that had come before. He sat next to me at the table, and somehow his presence changed the entire dynamic. Amy still made her pointed comments about successful marriages, and Jessica still shared updates about her perfect life, but every time someone took a shot at me, Marcus would ask a question that redirected the conversation. When Amy started talking about her wedding planning again, Marcus cut in with, "That's nice. Hannah, didn't you design the logo for that new restaurant downtown?" Mom showed me the photo. Pretty impressive work. When Dad made a comment about people who don't contribute to society, Marcus said, quote, "Speaking of contributing, Hannah's been helping Mrs. Rodriguez next door with her computer problems, right? That's the kind of community service that matters." It was subtle, but effective. For the first time in months, I felt like someone was in my corner. After dinner, Marcus and I sat on the back porch with beers, watching the sun set behind the old maple tree where we used to climb as kids. "They've been treating you like this the whole time?" he asked. "Pretty much. And David's been texting you." I'd mentioned it briefly in the car, but Marcus had filed it away. He wants to work things out. What do you want? To never see him again. The words came out fiercer than I'd intended, but apparently that makes me stubborn and ungrateful. Marcus took a long drink of his beer. "You know what I learned overseas, Hannah? Sometimes the people who claim to love you are the most dangerous ones. Because they know exactly where to aim when they want to hurt you." Quote. Over the next few days, Marcus quietly observed the family dynamics. He didn't say much, but I could see him cataloging every slight, every passive-aggressive comment, every way they diminished me. He'd been trained to gather intelligence, and my family had no idea they were being studied. The breaking point came on Saturday night. David showed up unannounced. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when the doorbell rang. Mom answered it, and I heard her delighted voice. "David, what a wonderful surprise! Come in, come in." My blood turned to ice. I dried my hands on the dish towel and walked slowly toward the living room, where I found David sitting on the couch like he belonged there. He'd always been handsome in a conventional way, clean-cut, well-dressed, the kind of man mothers approved of. Tonight he was wearing the blue button-down I'd bought him for his birthday 2 years ago. "Hannah," he said, standing up with that smile I used to find charming. "You look good. What are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood. I thought maybe we could talk." Dad clapped David on the shoulder. "Good man. That's the spirit." "Where's Marcus?" Mom asked, looking around. "He'll want to see David." "Marcus is upstairs," I said. "And David, I don't think we have anything to talk about." David's smile faltered slightly. "Come on, Hannah. We were together for 8 years. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counted for something. Past tense." "I've been thinking about what went wrong between us," David continued, ignoring my obvious discomfort. "I know I wasn't perfect. I was working too much, stressed about money. Maybe I was a little controlling sometimes. A little controlling. Like that minimized the years of walking on eggshells, of having my every move monitored and criticized." "People change," Amy said from the doorway. She'd appeared with Derek, both of them drawn by the drama. "Look at Derek and me. We've both had to compromise and grow." "Exactly," Jessica chimed in, settling into her favorite armchair. "Marriage is work. You can't just give up when things get difficult." I felt the familiar sensation of being surrounded, cornered by people who claimed to know what was best for me. David sensed the shift in the room and pressed his advantage. "I miss you, Hannah. I miss us. The house feels empty without you." He took a step closer. "I know you've been struggling here. Your mom told me about apartment hunting, the money issues. You don't have to go through this alone." "I'm not alone," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. "You could come home tonight," David said softly. "We could start over. No lawyers, no paperwork, just us, working on our marriage like we should have done from the beginning." Mom clasped her hands together like she was watching a romantic movie. Dad nodded approvingly. Jessica and Amy exchanged meaningful looks. Even Derek seemed moved by David's performance. "What do you say, Hannah?" David reached for my hand. "Come home with me." That's when Marcus came down the stairs. He moved quietly, the way he always did, but something about his presence changed the temperature in the room. Everyone turned to look at him, and I saw David's confidence waver for the first time. "Evening," Marcus said pleasantly. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Marcus Patterson, Hannah's brother." David straightened up, trying to reclaim his authority. "David Mitchell, Hannah's husband." "Ex-husband," Marcus corrected mildly. "I heard you were having a conversation with my sister about her future. Mind if I join in?" "Of course not," David said, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. Marcus had that effect on people, not because he was particularly tall or imposing, but because he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd been tested in ways most people never would be. "Good," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from David. "So you're saying Hannah should come back to you. Interesting proposition. Tell me, what's changed since the divorce?" David shifted uncomfortably under Marcus's steady gaze. "What do you mean? What's changed?" "Well, you were married for 8 years, and something went wrong enough that Hannah felt she needed to leave. Now you're here asking her to come back. So I'm curious, what's different now that wasn't different 3 months ago?" The room fell silent. Even Mom stopped fidgeting with her jewelry. David glanced around at the family, clearly expecting support, but Marcus's question had shifted the dynamic entirely. "I've had time to think," David said finally, "to realize what I lost." Marcus leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "And what exactly did you lose?" "My wife, my partner, the woman I love." "Interesting, because from what I understand, Hannah tried to talk to you about problems in the marriage for years. Couples counseling, remember? You weren't interested in fixing things then, so what makes you think you're interested now? David's jaw tightened. Look, I don't know what Hannah's told you, but she hasn't told me much, actually. Hannah's always been private about personal things. But I'm a pretty good listener, and I pick up on details. Marcus's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. For instance, I notice she flinches when people raise their voices. That's new since I've been gone. I also notice she apologizes for things that don't require apologies, like asking for a second helping at dinner or changing the TV channel. I felt heat creep up my neck. I hadn't realized I was doing those things. People develop habits, David said dismissively. That doesn't mean anything. You're right, people do develop habits, usually as responses to their environment. Marcus turned to look at me. Hannah, when you were married, did David ever raise his voice at you? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Everyone was staring at me, waiting for my answer. David's eyes were boring into me, and I could practically feel the warning radiating from him. I started, then stopped. The old instinct to protect him, to maintain the facade, was still strong. It's okay, Marcus said gently. Take your time. Sometimes, I whispered. Sometimes he raised his voice. Okay. Did he ever call you names when he was angry? David stood up abruptly. I don't like where this is going. Hannah and I had normal marital disagreements. Every couple fights. Did I ask you? Marcus didn't look at David, keeping his attention focused on me. Hannah? Yes, I said louder this time. He called me names. What kind of names? Marcus, Dad interrupted. This is inappropriate. Whatever problems they have, they can work them out privately. Actually, Dad, I think this is exactly the right time and place for this conversation. Hannah's been living here for 3 months, and from what I can see, she's been getting a lot of advice about her marriage. But nobody asked her what actually happened. Seems like an oversight. Marcus's tone was still pleasant, but there was steel underneath it. Hannah, what kind of names did he call you? I glanced around the room at my family. Mom looked uncomfortable. Jessica was frowning. Amy was whispering something to Derek. But Marcus's presence gave me strength I hadn't felt in months. Stupid. Worthless. Crazy. He said I was too sensitive, too dramatic, that no one else would ever want me. The words tumbled out, each one feeling like a small liberation. He said I was lucky he put up with me. The silence that followed was deafening. David's face had gone red, and he was clenching and unclenching his fists. Those sound like pretty harsh things to say to someone you love, Marcus observed. Did this happen often? Every time we disagreed about anything. And toward the end, even when we didn't disagree. If dinner was late, if I forgot to pick up his dry cleaning, if I talked to a friend he didn't like. Speaking of friends, Marcus said, do you still keep in touch with Sarah Chen? I remember you two were close. Sarah, my college roommate, my maid of honor, my best friend, for over a decade. I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. No, I said quietly. Why not? I looked at David, who was staring at me with barely contained fury. David thought she was a bad influence. She was divorced, and he said divorced women try to break up happy marriages. So he asked you to stop talking to her? He said if I cared about our marriage, I'd make better choices about who I spent time with. Marcus nodded slowly. What about your book club? You used to love those monthly meetings. I stopped going. And your photography hobby? You had that nice camera and took beautiful pictures. David said it was a waste of money, that I should focus on more practical things. Like what? Like being a better wife. The words hung in the air like an indictment. I saw Mom's hand fly to her mouth, saw Jessica shift uncomfortably in her chair. Even Amy looked troubled. Marcus leaned forward slightly. David, I'm curious about something. When Hannah wanted to spend time with friends or pursue her hobbies, how did those conversations usually go? I don't have to answer your questions, David snapped. You weren't there. You don't know what our marriage was like. You're absolutely right. I wasn't there, but Hannah was, and she's telling us what it was like. Marcus's voice remained calm, but there was something dangerous in his eyes now. Hannah, did David ever physically prevent you from leaving the house? Not exactly. What does not exactly mean? I felt the old shame creeping in, the voice in my head that said I was being dramatic, that it wasn't as bad as I was making it sound. But Marcus was waiting, and something about his patient attention made me want to tell the truth for once. He would hide my car keys when he was angry, or he'd pick fights right before I was supposed to meet someone, then say I was abandoning him when he needed me most. Sometimes he'd get really upset and say he might hurt himself if I left. Mom gasped. Dad's face had gone pale. Even Derek was staring at David with new eyes. So he used emotional manipulation to control your movements, Marcus said. What about your finances? Marcus, this is enough, Jessica protested. David made mistakes, but everyone makes mistakes in marriage. Did you make those same kinds of mistakes with Tom? Marcus asked his sister. Did you isolate him from his friends? Control his access to money? Call him names and threaten self-harm when he tries to have independence? Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish. That's different. How is it different? Because David's a good man. He provides for Hannah. He provided for her while simultaneously making sure she couldn't provide for herself, Marcus interrupted. Hannah, tell me about the joint bank account. I didn't want to. This was the part that made me feel most stupid, most ashamed of my own naivete. But Marcus was looking at me with such gentle encouragement, and for the first time in months, I felt like someone actually wanted to hear my side of the story. I wasn't allowed to have my own account, I said. David said married couples should share everything, but he controlled all the money. I had to ask permission for every purchase, even groceries. He would question every expense, make me return things he thought were unnecessary. What happened when you started your graphic design business? He said it was selfish, that I should be focusing on our marriage instead of playing around with art projects. When I got my first client, he said I was neglecting my responsibilities at home. And the money you earned from that business went into his account. He said he'd manage it better than I could. David had been getting more agitated with each revelation. Now he exploded. This is ridiculous. Hannah's making me sound like some kind of monster. I was trying to build a stable life for us. I was protecting our future. Protecting it from what? Marcus asked calmly. From her bad decisions. Hannah's always been impulsive, emotional. Someone had to be the responsible one. Quote, so you took over her finances, isolated her from friends, controlled her activities, and verbally abused her because she's impulsive? I never abused her. What would you call telling your wife she's worthless and that no one else would want her? I was frustrated. Everyone says things they don't mean when they're frustrated. Marcus stood up then, and I saw David take an involuntary step backward. My brother wasn't particularly tall or bulky, but there was something about the way he moved that suggested coiled violence. Let me tell you something about frustration, David, Marcus said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I've been frustrated. I've been shot at, bombed, sleep-deprived, and pushed to my absolute limit. You know what I've never done? I've never taken that frustration out on someone smaller and weaker than me. I've never used my position of power to hurt someone who trusted me. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Hannah, Marcus said, not taking his eyes off David, I want you to listen to me very carefully. What this man did to you has a name. It's called emotional abuse. It's real, it's serious, and it's not your fault. Now wait just a minute, Dad started to protest. No, Dad, you wait. Marcus finally turned away from David to face our father. For 3 months, Hannah has been living in this house, trying to rebuild her life after escaping an abusive marriage. And instead of supporting her, this family has been telling her she's a failure, that she should go back to her abuser, that she should be grateful for the chance to be mistreated. The accusation hung in the air like a physical blow. Mom started crying quietly. Jessica looked stricken. Amy was staring at the floor. We didn't know, Mom whispered. You didn't want to know, Marcus corrected. Because it was easier to blame Hannah than to admit that the man you all approved of was hurting her. David's composure finally cracked completely. This is insane. I'm not going to stand here and be lectured by some PTSD-riddled soldier who doesn't know the first thing about marriage. The words left his mouth before he could stop them, and the effect was immediate. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Marcus went completely still, the kind of stillness that preceded either flight or violence. "What did you just say?" Marcus's voice was barely audible. David seemed to realize his mistake, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "You heard me. You've been overseas for what, 10 years? Playing army while the rest of us built real lives. Now you come back and think you can judge how normal people live?" "David, stop," I said, panic rising in my chest. I'd seen Marcus angry exactly twice in my life, and both times had ended badly for whoever provoked him. But David was past the point of rational thought. "Hannah's always been dramatic, always been the victim. She's got you fooled, just like she tried to fool the divorce court. But I know her. I lived with her for 8 years. She's manipulative, He never finished the sentence because Marcus moved faster than I'd ever seen anyone move. One second, David was standing by the couch. The next, he was pressed against the wall with Marcus's forearm across his throat. "Let me explain something to you very clearly," Marcus said, his face inches from David's. "I've spent the last 14 months watching better men than you die for the freedom you take for granted. I've seen real evil, real violence, real monsters. And you know what? You're not as different from them as you think you are." David's face was turning red. He clawed at Marcus's arm, but my brother didn't budge. "Marcus!" Dad shouted, jumping to his feet. "Let him go!" "You use fear to control people," Marcus continued, ignoring Dad's protests. "You isolate your victims from their support systems. You make them dependent on you, then convince them they're worthless without you. The only difference between you and the terrorists I've been fighting is geography." "Marcus, please," I said, touching his shoulder. I could feel the tension in his muscles, the barely controlled rage that years of military training had taught him to channel. He looked at me then, and something in my voice seemed to reach him. Slowly, he stepped back, releasing David, who immediately started gasping and rubbing his throat. "You're crazy," David wheezed. "You assaulted me. I could press charges." "You could try," Marcus said calmly, straightening his shirt. "Of course. Then we'd have to explain to the police why you came to this house uninvited to harass your ex-wife. We'd have to discuss the pattern of emotional abuse, the financial control, the isolation tactics. I wonder how that would play out in court." David looked around the room desperately, seeking allies, but found none. Even Dad, who'd been defending him moments earlier, was staring at him with new understanding. "This is ridiculous," David muttered, but the fight had gone out of him. "Hannah, you know this isn't what I'm like. You know me better than anyone." "I do know you," I said quietly. "That's why I left." "You don't mean that. You're just confused, letting him fill your head with military paranoia." David took a step toward me, but Marcus shifted slightly, blocking his path. "Hannah, come home with me tonight. We'll talk this through without all these people interfering." "She's not going anywhere with you," Marcus said simply. "You don't get to make that decision for her." "You're right. Hannah makes her own decisions. But she's going to make them without you pressuring her, threatening her, or manipulating her." Marcus crossed his arms. "In fact, I think it's time for you to leave." "This isn't your house," David protested. "Actually," Dad said slowly, surprising everyone, "it is his house. He grew up here, and he's always welcome here. You, on the other hand, are not." David stared at Dad in shock. "Robert, you can't be serious. An hour ago you were telling Hannah she should work things out with me." "An hour ago I didn't know what working things out actually meant," Dad said heavily. He looked older suddenly, worn down by the weight of his own complicity. "I thought marriage meant compromise. I didn't realize it meant surrendering your entire identity." "Mom?" David turned to her desperately. "Linda, you understand. You know Hannah. You know she exaggerates things." Mom was still crying, but she shook her head. "I think you should go, David." "This is unbelievable. Jessica? Amy? You're gonna let them rewrite history like this?" Jessica looked down at her hands. "I keep thinking about what you said, about Hannah being lucky you put up with her. Tom's never said anything like that to me, not once in 12 years. Amy was chewing her bottom lip, a nervous habit from childhood. "Derek, you've never hidden my car keys, have you?" "Of course not," Derek said, looking horrified. Why would I do that? To keep me from seeing my friends when you were angry. Amy, I would never. Derek trailed off, staring at David with disgust. Jesus, man, what's wrong with you? David's face cycled through several emotions. Rage, desperation, disbelief. Finally, he settled on cold fury. Fine, you want to destroy 8 years of marriage over some misunderstandings? Fine, but don't come crying to me when reality sets in, Hannah. Don't call me when you realize what you've thrown away. He headed for the door, then turned back for one final shot. You're 32 years old with no money, no career, and no prospects. You think you're going to find someone better than me? Good luck with that. David, Marcus said quietly, stopping him at the threshold. If you contact my sister again, through calls, texts, emails, social media, or showing up places she's likely to be, I will consider it harassment. If you try to manipulate our family into pressuring her to take you back, I will make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of man you are. And if you ever speak to her the way you just did again, you'll discover that my PTSD can be very unpredictable. The threat was delivered in the same conversational tone Marcus had used all evening, which somehow made it more terrifying than any shouting would have been. David left without another word, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the windows. The silence that followed was profound. Nobody seemed to know what to say or where to look. I felt like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. Hannah, Mom said finally, her voice thick with tears. I'm so sorry, I had no idea, we had no idea. I tried to tell you, I said, but there was no anger in it anymore, just exhaustion. We should have listened, Jessica said. She was crying too now. We should have asked the right questions instead of just assuming. Why didn't you tell us how bad it was? Amy asked. Why didn't you make us understand? It was Marcus who answered. Because abusers are very good at making their victims feel like it's their fault. They convince you that no one will believe you, that you're overreacting, that you deserve it. And when the people who are supposed to love you start saying the same things the abuser says. He looked around the room. It just confirms what he's been telling her all along. Dad sat down heavily in his recliner. 8 years. He was doing this to you for 8 years, and we never saw it. He was charming when you were around, I said. Abusers usually are. They save their worst behavior for when they're alone with their victims. The signs were there, Marcus said. Hannah got quieter over the years. She stopped talking about her friends, her hobbies. She started deferring to David on everything, even small decisions like what to order at restaurants. But it happened gradually, so it seemed normal. What do we do now? Mom asked. How do we fix this? We start by believing Hannah when she tells us about her experiences, Marcus said. We stop trying to fix her life for her and start supporting the choices she makes for herself. And we make sure David understands that this family is united in protecting her. I looked around at these people who'd hurt me so deeply over the past few months, and I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine remorse, real understanding, and the beginning of the support I'd needed all along. There's something else, I said quietly. David has been escalating. The texts, the phone calls, showing up here tonight. I don't think he's going to just accept this and move on. Marcus nodded grimly. Abusers often get worse when they lose control over their victims. We need to be prepared for that. How do you prepare? Dad asked. Documentation, security measures, making sure Hannah's never alone if we can help it. Marcus looked at me, and maybe it's time to talk to a lawyer about a restraining order. You think he's dangerous? Jessica asked, fear creeping into her voice. I think he's a man who's used to getting his way through intimidation and control, Marcus said. And tonight, for the first time, that didn't work. So yes, I think he could be dangerous. The gravity of the situation settled over the room like a dark cloud. This wasn't just about a failed marriage anymore. This was about safety, about survival, about a family finally coming together to protect one of their own. But it was also about something else, the beginning of my real freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't facing this alone. My brother was home, my family finally understood the truth, and David's mask had been ripped away completely. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Marcus on the phone in the kitchen. His voice was low and professional, the tone he used when he was handling serious business. I padded downstairs in my pajamas to find him sitting at the breakfast table with a legal pad covered in notes. A cup of black coffee growing cold beside him. "Yeah, I understand. Tuesday at 10 works. Thanks, Karen." He hung up and looked at me. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I have in months, actually." It was true. For the first time since the divorce, I'd slept through the night without waking up in a panic, wondering if David might show up at the door. Good. That was Karen Brennan, family law attorney. She specializes in domestic abuse cases. "I've made you an appointment for Tuesday morning to discuss a restraining order." I sat down across from him. "Marcus, I don't know if that's necessary. Maybe last night scared him enough that he'll just leave me alone." Marcus looked at me with the patient expression he'd perfected over years of dealing with stubborn people. "Hannah, in my experience, bullies don't usually back down when they're confronted. They regroup and come back harder." As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed on the counter. Marcus and I both looked at it, then at each other. I walked over and checked the screen. 3 missed calls from David, all placed between 2 and 4 a.m. There were also 7 text messages. "What did they say?" Marcus asked. I scrolled through them, my stomach sinking with each line. He's apologizing, saying he was caught off guard last night, that he didn't handle things well. He wants to meet for coffee to talk calmly, without family interference. And? I kept reading. He says he understands why I might need space, but he hopes I'll reconsider throwing away 8 years over what he calls a few difficult conversations. Marcus made a note on his pad. "Screenshot all of those and forward them to me. We'll need them for the restraining order." "He sounds reasonable in the texts," I said, hating myself for even thinking about it. "Of course he does. That's how manipulation works. Yesterday he was angry because his usual tactics weren't working. Today he's back to love bombing and gaslighting." Marcus stood up and refilled his coffee. "Hannah, I want you to think about something. In 8 years of marriage, how many times did David apologize after he said something cruel to you?" I thought about it. Pretty often, actually. And what happened after those apologies? The pattern was so clear once he pointed it out. He'd be sweet for a few days, then gradually go back to the way he was before, usually worse. Exactly. The apology isn't real remorse. It's just another form of control. He's trying to reset the dynamic so he can start the cycle over again. Mom came into the kitchen then, already dressed for church, even though it was barely 7 a.m. She looked like she hadn't slept much either. "How are you feeling this morning, honey?" she asked, pouring herself coffee with shaking hands. "I'm okay, Mom. Really. I keep thinking about last night, about the things David said about you being dramatic and manipulative." Mom's voice cracked slightly. "I said those same things, didn't I? I called you dramatic, too." "Mom, no, let me say this. I was wrong, completely, inexcusably wrong. I should have listened to you instead of making assumptions about what a good marriage looks like." She sat down next to me and took my hand. "I failed you as a mother, and I'm sorry." The simple acknowledgement hit me harder than I'd expected. I'd spent so many years trying to get my family to see what was really happening, and now that they finally did, I felt simultaneously vindicated and heartbroken. "We all failed her," Dad said from the doorway. He was still in his bathrobe, his gray hair standing up at odd angles. I keep thinking about Christmas dinner 2 years ago, when David made that comment about Hannah burning the rolls. I thought it was just teasing, but now you realize it was part of a pattern of public humiliation designed to make me feel incompetent, I finished. Dad winced. "I should have said something then. I should have told him that wasn't appropriate." "He would have just been more careful about hiding it," Marcus said. "Abusers are adaptable. When one tactic stops working, they try another." Jessica appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas with her hair in a messy bun. "Is it too early for family crisis coffee?" she asked weakly. "Never too early," Mom said, getting up to pour another cup. "I called Tom last night after we got home," Jessica said, settling into a chair. "Told him everything that happened. Asked him if he thought I was dramatic or too sensitive when we disagreed about things." "What did he say?" I asked. "He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Said the whole point of marriage was that you're supposed to be on the same team, not constantly tearing each other down." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. Hannah, I'm so sorry. I kept comparing your marriage to mine, but I never realized how different they actually were. Amy stumbled in next, looking like she'd been crying. Derek and I talked all night, she announced without preamble. I asked him about all the things David did to you. The financial control, the isolation from friends, the name-calling. Derek was horrified. He said if he ever treated me that way, I should leave him immediately and never look back. She sat down heavily and put her head in her hands. I feel like such an idiot. I thought I was being supportive by encouraging you to work things out. I thought I was helping. You thought you were, Marcus said. That's what makes emotional abuse so insidious. It looks like normal relationship problems from the outside. The victim learns to downplay it. The abuser is charming to everyone else. And well-meaning people give advice that actually helps the abuser maintain control. My phone buzzed again. Another text from David. What does this one say? Marcus asked. I read it aloud. I drove by the house this morning and saw all the cars in the driveway. I guess you're having a family meeting about me. I hope you're at least being fair, telling them about the good times too. Remember our anniversary trip to Vermont? Remember how happy we were? The room fell silent. I could even see how creepy it was that he'd been driving by the house, monitoring who was here. That's it, Marcus said, standing up abruptly. We're going to the police station this morning. That's stalking behavior, and it's escalating. On a Sunday? Crime doesn't take weekends off, and neither do cops. Get dressed. We're documenting all of this before it gets worse. An hour later, I found myself sitting in the Millbrook Police Department with Marcus, giving a statement to Officer Patricia Wells, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen everything twice. So your ex-husband showed up at your parents' house uninvited last night, became verbally aggressive when you refused to reconcile, and is now sending multiple texts and driving by the house to monitor your activities? Officer Wells summarized. That's right. And this is part of a larger pattern of controlling behavior during your marriage? I nodded, feeling awkward about discussing my private life with a stranger, even a sympathetic one. Mrs. Patterson, I want you to understand that what you're describing is textbook post-separation abuse, Officer Wells said. It's unfortunately very common. When abusers lose control over their victims, they often escalate their tactics to try to regain that control. So you believe her? Marcus asked. I've been doing this for 15 years, Mr. Patterson. I know what domestic abuse looks like, and I know what victims sound like when they're telling the truth. She turned back to me. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I want him to leave me alone. Then I'd strongly recommend filing for a protective order. With the documentation you've provided, the texts, the uninvited visit, the surveillance behavior, I think you'd have a good chance of getting one approved. What would that do? It would legally prohibit him from contacting you, coming to your residence or workplace, or being within a certain distance of you. If he violates the order, he can be arrested immediately. It felt like a big step, making it official like that. But as I thought about David lurking outside the house, monitoring our family meeting, I realized I didn't have much choice. Okay, I said, let's do it. Officer Wells smiled. Good for you. A lot of women are afraid to take this step because they worry about making their abuser angrier. But in my experience, setting clear legal boundaries is often the only thing that works with these types of personalities. As we filled out the paperwork, she continued talking. I also want to give you some safety planning information. Even with a protective order, you need to be aware that the most dangerous time for abuse victims is often right after they leave their abuser. That's when the abuser realizes they're truly losing control, and some of them become desperate. Are you saying David might try to hurt Hannah physically? Marcus asked, his voice sharp with concern. I'm saying we should be prepared for that possibility. Most emotional abusers don't escalate to physical violence, but some do. And the behavior you're describing, the surveillance, the refusal to accept the end of the relationship, the attempts to isolate her from family support, those are warning signs. She handed me a pamphlet about domestic violence resources and safety planning. I want you to read this carefully. Keep your phone charged at all times. Vary your routine so you're not predictable. Make sure someone always knows where you're going and when you expect to be back. And trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, call 911 immediately. As we left the police station, I felt simultaneously empowered and terrified. I was finally taking concrete steps to protect myself, but I was also acknowledging that I might actually need protection. You did good there, Marcus said as we got back in the car. I'm scared, I admitted. What if this makes everything worse? Hannah, it's already bad. At least now you're not facing it alone, and you have legal protections in place. He started the engine. Besides, David's about to learn something he's probably never had to deal with before. What's that? Marcus's smile was grim but determined. Consequences. The protective order was approved on Wednesday morning. Judge Margaret Henley, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the evidence with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen too many cases like mine end badly. Mr. Mitchell will be served with these papers today, she told me as she signed the order. He'll have 72 hours to respond if he wants to contest it, but given the documentation you've provided, I doubt he'll be successful. In the meantime, this order is in full effect. No contact, no third-party contact, and he must stay at least 500 feet away from you, your residence, and your workplace. I walked out of the courthouse feeling like I could breathe properly for the first time in weeks. Marcus was waiting for me on the steps, along with Mom, who had insisted on coming for moral support. How do you feel? Mom asked as we walked to the car. Like I just took my life back, I said honestly. That feeling lasted exactly 6 hours. I was at the Millbrook Public Library, working on a logo design for a local veterinary clinic, when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Alerts were coming in faster than I could read them. David had created fake social media accounts and was systematically contacting everyone I knew. The messages were carefully crafted to sound concerned rather than malicious. Hi, I'm a friend of Hannah's. I'm worried about her mental health since her divorce. She's been making some alarming statements about her ex-husband, and her family is really concerned. If you care about Hannah, please reach out to her and encourage her to get professional help. Within an hour, I had 12 worried calls from friends I hadn't spoken to in months. Sarah Chen, my old college roommate, called in tears. Hannah, what's going on? Someone contacted me saying you're having a breakdown and making false accusations against David. Are you okay? I explained about the protective order and David's violation of it, but I could hear the confusion in Sarah's voice. She'd known David during the early good years of our marriage, the charming, attentive version of him that everyone else saw. I just can't believe David would do something like this, she said carefully. Are you sure you're thinking clearly? Divorce is really traumatic and sometimes people... I hung up on her. I couldn't bear to hear another person I cared about question my reality. Marcus found me crying in the library parking lot when he came to pick me up. He's contacting everyone I know, I sobbed, making me sound crazy, making himself sound like the victim. People I've known for years are questioning whether I'm telling the truth. Marcus's jaw tightened as he scrolled through the messages I showed him. This is a clear violation of the protective order. Third-party contact is explicitly prohibited. But how do we prove it was him? The accounts are all fake names. We don't have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, just show that it's more likely than not that he was behind it. The timing alone is suspicious. These accounts were all created today, hours after he was served with the protective order. We drove straight to the police station, where Officer Wells took our report with grim satisfaction. Abusers often try this tactic, she explained as she documented everything. It's called a smear campaign. They know that if they can make the victim look unstable or unreliable, people will stop believing them. It's particularly effective against women, unfortunately. What can we do about it? I'm issuing a warrant for his arrest for violating the protective order. We'll also contact the social media companies to have these fake accounts removed. She looked at me sympathetically. But Hannah, I have to warn you, the damage to your reputation might already be done. People tend to remember the accusation more than the retraction. She was right. By the time we got home, Mom was fielding calls from concerned church members who'd been contacted by David's fake accounts. Jessica called to say that Tom's coworkers were asking him about his unstable sister-in-law. Even the veterinarian I was doing the logo design for called to check in on my mental health. This is exactly what he wanted, I said, pacing around the living room like a caged animal. He's making me look like the crazy ex-wife who can't accept that the marriage is over. People who know you won't believe it, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. Will they? Sarah believed it. My college roommate, who knew me better than almost anyone, believed I might be having a breakdown and making false accusations. Amy arrived that evening with Derek and a bottle of wine, looking shell-shocked. My entire office is talking about this, she announced. Someone contacted my boss, saying they were concerned about my family situation affecting my work performance. Jesus, Marcus muttered. How many people did he contact? It gets worse, Amy continued. Derek's ex-girlfriend messaged him, warning him that mental instability runs in my family and he should be careful about marrying into it. Derek looked furious. I told her exactly what she could do with her opinion, but Hannah, this guy is seriously unhinged. Who does something like this? Someone who's desperate to regain control, Marcus said grimly. David's not stupid. He knows he can't contact Hannah directly anymore, so he's trying to isolate her again by destroying her credibility with everyone she knows. My phone rang then. The caller ID showed David's number. Don't answer it, Marcus said immediately. But the protective order is exactly why you shouldn't answer it. Let it go to voicemail, then we'll have evidence of another violation. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Then again. Turn it off, Marcus ordered. I can't. What if there's an emergency? What if clients are trying to reach me? Then they'll call the house phone. Marcus held out his hand. Hannah, give me the phone. Reluctantly, I handed it over. He turned it off and slipped it into his pocket. We'll check the voicemails later, with Officer Wells present, but right now, you need to stop letting him have access to you. The house felt different that night, like we were under siege. Dad checked all the locks twice before bed. Mom kept peeking out the curtains at every small sound. Marcus positioned himself in the living room with a clear view of the front door and driveway. I tried to sleep, but every creak of the old house made me jump. Around 2 a.m., I gave up and went downstairs to find Marcus still awake, reading a book by lamplight. Can't sleep either? I asked. Old habit. Sleep light in hostile territory. I curled up on the other end of the couch. Is that what this is? Hostile territory? Right now, yes. David's shown he's willing to escalate, and he's smart enough to be dangerous. Marcus closed his book and looked at me seriously. Hannah, I need you to understand something. This isn't going to end just because you have a piece of paper from a judge. David feels like he's fighting for his life. His reputation, his self-image, his sense of control. People like that don't give up easily. So what do? We document everything. We stay vigilant. We make sure you're never alone until this is resolved. He paused. And we prepare for the possibility that it might get worse before it gets better. As if summoned by his words, a car engine rumbled slowly down our quiet street. The sound was unusual. Most of our neighbors were asleep by 10 p.m., and it was now well past 2 a.m. Marcus was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with the fluid grace of someone trained for combat. He peered through the curtains, then immediately reached for his phone. What is it? I whispered. Dark sedan, circling the block for the third time. Can't see the driver, but the timing is suspicious. He dialed 911 while continuing to watch the street. This is Marcus Patterson, at 847 Maple Street. I need to report suspicious activity. A vehicle has been circling our block repeatedly at 2 a.m., and we have an active protective order against someone who's already violated it once today. The dispatcher assured him that a patrol car would be in the area within minutes. Sure enough, the sedan disappeared as soon as the police cruiser turned onto our street. Probably a coincidence, the responding officer said when Marcus explained the situation. But we'll increase patrols in your neighborhood for the next few nights, just to be safe. After the officer left, Marcus and I sat in the darkened living room, both of us staring out at the empty street. He was out there, wasn't he? I said quietly. I think so. What's he planning? Marcus was silent for a long moment. I don't know, but whatever it is, he's not going to catch us off guard. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device I didn't recognize. Personal alarm, he explained. Military grade. Push this button, and it emits a sound loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood and automatically calls 911. I want you to carry this with you everywhere. I took the device, surprised by how heavy it felt in my palm. Such a small thing, but it represented something much larger. The acknowledgement that I was truly in danger, that the man I'd been married to for 8 years might actually try to hurt me. Marcus? Yeah. Thank you. For believing me, for protecting me, for everything. He reached over and squeezed my hand. That's what family does, Hannah. That's what we should have been doing all along. Outside, the street remained empty and quiet. But I had the unsettling feeling that David was still out there somewhere, planning his next move. The protective order had been meant to give me peace of mind, but instead, it felt like we'd just declared war on someone who had nothing left to lose. The confrontation came 3 days later, on a Thursday afternoon that started like any other. I was at Millbrook Coffee House, working on my laptop while waiting for a potential client to arrive for a consultation. Marcus had driven me there and was supposed to pick me up in an hour, but I felt safe in the busy cafe surrounded by other people. David wouldn't try anything in public, I reasoned. He was too concerned with his image for that. I was wrong. The first sign of trouble was when conversations around me started dying down. I looked up from my screen to see people staring toward the entrance, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. That's when I saw him. David stood in the doorway, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. He looked terrible. Unshaven, wrinkled clothes, dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping. But it was his expression that made my blood run cold. There was something desperate and unhinged in his eyes that I'd never seen before, even during our worst fights. My hand moved instinctively to the personal alarm in my pocket, but David was already walking toward my corner table. Several other customers were watching now, sensing the tension even if they didn't understand the situation. Hannah, David said when he reached my table. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been shouting. We need to talk. You're violating the protective order, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. You need to leave. I'm not leaving until you listen to me. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down uninvited. Do you have any idea what you've done to my life? What have your lies cost me? I glanced around the cafe. The barista, a college-aged girl with purple hair, was already reaching for her phone. Other customers were whispering among themselves, and I could feel their attention focused on our table. I haven't told any lies, I said. Haven't you? My boss called me into his office yesterday. Apparently, someone filed a complaint with HR about me being a, quote, potential threat to female employees. I'd been suspended pending investigation. David's voice was getting louder, attracting more stares. My neighbors won't look at me. My own mother asked me if the things you're saying are true. David, please lower your voice. You're scaring people. I'm scaring people? He laughed bitterly. You've turned me into some kind of monster with your sob story. Poor Hannah, the victim of Big Bad David. But we both know the truth, don't we? The truth is that you controlled and manipulated me for years. The truth is that you're here right now, violating a court order, proving that you can't respect boundaries. Boundaries? David slammed his hand on the table, making my laptop jump. Several people gasped, and I heard a chair scrape as someone stood up. You want to talk about boundaries? You destroyed my life, Hannah. My career, my reputation, my relationships with my family. All because you couldn't handle being married to someone stronger than you. That's when I saw Marcus. He must have finished his errands early, because he appeared in the cafe doorway like an avenging angel. His eyes took in the scene immediately. David, looming over my table, the frightened faces of other customers, my obvious distress. His expression went completely cold. David was still ranting, oblivious to the new arrival. You were nothing when I met you, a mediocre art student with no direction, no ambition. I gave you stability, a home, a future, and this is how you repay me? That's enough, Marcus said quietly from behind him. David spun around, and I saw fear flicker across his face before it was replaced by defiant anger. Great, your attack dog is here. I'm going to give you one chance to walk away, Marcus said, his voice still conversational but carrying an unmistakable threat. "Stand up, walk out that door, and maybe we can all pretend this never happened. Or what, you'll beat me up in front of all these witnesses? That worked so well for you last time." Marcus smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen on my brother's face. "David, you seem to have misunderstood something fundamental about our last conversation. I didn't threaten you because I'm impulsive or violent. I threatened you because I'm very, very good at violence, and I don't like seeing my sister hurt." The cafe had gone completely silent now. Even the espresso machine seemed to have stopped hissing. "You think you scare me?" David stood up, trying to match Marcus's calm demeanor but failing. His hands were shaking, whether from fear or rage. I couldn't tell. "You think your military tough guy act impresses anyone. You're just a broken soldier who can't adjust to civilian life." "Maybe," Marcus said, stepping closer. "But this broken soldier has been trained to eliminate threats to people he cares about, and right now you're threatening my sister." "I'm talking to my wife." "Ex-wife," Marcus corrected, "who has a legal document saying you're not allowed to be within 500 feet of her, which means you're not just threatening her, you're breaking the law." That's when David snapped completely. "She's ruined everything," he screamed, spinning back toward me. 8 years I gave you. 8 years of my life wasted on an ungrateful, delusional." He never finished the sentence, because Marcus moved with lightning speed, grabbing David's arm and twisting it behind his back in one fluid motion. David cried out in pain and surprise as Marcus bent him over the table. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm despite the fact that he was restraining a struggling man. "You're going to shut up, you're going to let me escort you outside, and you're going to wait quietly for the police to arrive. If you resist, if you try to hurt my sister, if you so much as look at her wrong, I will demonstrate exactly what 3 tours in Afghanistan taught me about subduing hostile combatants." The purple-haired barista was already on the phone with 911. Other customers had their phones out recording everything. David seemed to realize that his public breakdown was being documented and would undoubtedly end up online. "You're all crazy," he said, but the fight had gone out of him. "Hannah's poisoned all of you against me. You'll see. When she destroys your lives the way she destroyed mine, you'll understand what I was trying to protect you from." Marcus maintained his grip until 2 police officers arrived. I recognized one of them, Officer Wells, who took one look at the situation and immediately understood what had happened. "Mr. Mitchell," she said with professional calm, "you're under arrest for violating a protective order. You have the right to remain silent." As they handcuffed David and led him away, he looked back at me one final time. The desperation and rage were gone, replaced by something that looked almost like pity. "You think you've won," he said quietly, "but look around, Hannah. Look at what you've become. A scared little girl hiding behind her big brother, afraid of her own shadow. Is this really the life you wanted?" For just a moment, his words hit their mark. I looked around the cafe at the staring faces, the phones still recording, the evidence of my very public breakdown of a marriage. I felt small and exposed and ashamed. Then Marcus put his hand on my shoulder. "Hannah," he said firmly, "look at me." I met his eyes, seeing strength and love and absolute certainty. "You are not hiding behind me," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are standing up for yourself with the support of people who love you. There's a difference, and don't let anyone convince you otherwise." He was right. I had stood up for myself. I had left an abusive marriage, sought legal protection, and refused to be manipulated back into a toxic situation. The fact that I had help didn't make me weak. It made me smart. Officer Wells approached our table. "Hannah, we'll need a statement from you about today's incident. This violation, combined with the social media harassment from earlier this week, should be enough to keep him in jail for a while." "How long?" Marcus asked. "With his behavior escalating the way it has, probably 6 months minimum, maybe longer if the judge decides he's a continued threat." 6 months. Half a year. Without looking over my shoulder. Without wondering when David would show up next. Without having to defend my reality to people who should have believed me from the start. That evening, our house felt different. The siege mentality was gone, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The family gathered for dinner. But this time, the conversation was about my future, rather than my failures. "I found you an apartment," Amy announced, pulling out her phone. "It's not fancy, but it's in a safe neighborhood, and you can afford it on your own. Mrs. Rodriguez next door wants to hire you to redo her entire website," Mom added, "and she's telling all her friends about your work." "Sarah called," Jessica said quietly. "Your college friend. She saw the video from the cafe on social media and realized what was really happening. She wants to reconnect, says she's sorry she didn't believe you at first." Quote, "I looked around the table at these people who had hurt me so deeply but had ultimately found their way back to supporting me. The family wasn't perfect, but it was worth fighting for." "What happens now?" Dad asked. "Now I will rebuild," I said simply. "My business, my friendships, my life, on my own terms." Marcus raised his beer in a toast. "To Hannah, who was brave enough to leave, smart enough to ask for help, and strong enough to start over." "To Hannah," the family echoed. As we clinked glasses, I realized that David had been wrong about one thing. I wasn't hiding behind my family. I was standing with them. And there was all the difference in the world. 3 months later, I moved into my own apartment, a sunny one-bedroom with hardwood floors and enough space for a proper art studio. My graphic design business was thriving, built on referrals from satisfied clients who appreciated my work and my story of survival. David was sentenced to 8 months in jail and 2 years probation. I didn't attend the hearing. I was too busy living my life to waste time watching him face the consequences of his choices. The best part wasn't the financial independence or the professional success, though. It was the simple joy of making decisions without fear, of going to sleep without anxiety, of waking up each morning knowing that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I had learned something important. Being under someone's protection isn't about being weak or dependent. Sometimes it's about being loved enough that people will stand with you when you're finding your strength. And sometimes that makes all the difference. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.